of the people of New Mexico.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. Can you hear me? If somebody can give me a signal. It's funny, Julie, because, okay, great. Now I know that you can hear me. Whenever I'm off of mute, I can't hear you, Julie, but I can see thumbs up, so that's a good thing. So my name's Tina Cordova, and Julie has already introduced me, and I'm a very proud alumnus from New Mexico Highlands University. Actually, I say all the time that my education prepared me to do the advocacy work that I do on behalf of the people of New Mexico who were harmed as a result of the Manhattan Project, the Trinity test, and the uranium mining that took place here. I'm going to talk very quickly about some background information so that everybody has a little bit of background information. And then I want to talk more specifically about the recently released Oppenheimer movie and those things that it doesn't portray that were left out and unfortunately were not included. But just to give everybody a little bit of perspective, we have received an enormous amount of attention because of the movie and because of their omission of the part that the people in New Mexico played in the history of the Manhattan Project and the Trinity test. So everybody, I think, is aware that we had the establishment of the Manhattan Project here and the Trinity test take place here. But a lot of people don't have a full understanding of how we have the cradle to grave process taking place here. The nuclear cycle begins with the cradle, that's the opening up of the earth and the extraction of uranium. And as a matter of fact, between Navajo Nation, Laguna, and Acoma Pueblo, we have 1,000 abandoned uranium mill and mine sites where they extracted 32 million tons of uranium. And those sites are now Superfund sites. Very few of them have been addressed. And I, about a year and a half ago, had an opportunity to go to Powati, which is one of the villages inside of Laguna Pueblo. It was the site of one of the largest open pit mines in the world. At the time that it was operational, it was the largest open pit mine in the world, and still exists there now as this huge, just enormous crater in the middle of the earth, in the middle of Powati village, where they're still raising children today. And when you stand there, it's mind-boggling because you realize you're standing on the mesa that is Powati, the village, and that less than a mile away is this enormous crater. And everything that's natural landscape appears so. It's beautiful New Mexico landscape, you know, green and just vividly New Mexico landscape. And then you see these other hills that have just sort of a yellow hue to them, and the sparse grass that grows on them is yellow also, and you realize those are uranium tailings. Now, I have good friends that worked in that industry. I work with them all the time on the advocacy work that we do. I'll explain that more in a moment, but they have told me stories that are quite mind-boggling also. As a matter of fact, the government used the people's poverty against them to coerce them into the mines without safety gear. To do that work. And I'll give you a good example. A good friend of mine, Arlene, was going to school here in Albuquerque. She was a young mother and had to leave her child behind in Laguna so that she could go to college. And she went home for spring break at one point, and there was a recruiter there for Kerr McGee. They were the operators of the Powati mine, and they asked her what she was doing with her life, and she said, I'm in college in Albuquerque. And they actually said to her that they could pay her more than she'd probably ever make as a college graduate, and they could put her to work right away. And she became what was called an ore transporter. Arlene says that they gave her a hard hat, safety glasses, and a dust mask. And they put her in a truck that was ill-equipped for hauling uranium ore. And as a matter of fact, she said on a regular occasion, the brakes would not work on the truck, and there were these pullouts, and she said we were told just to pull off the side of the road and to stop the truck. We could actually run it into these man-made berms, and that's what we did regularly to go ahead and stop the truck. They had no place to take their lunch breaks. So many of the miners stayed in the mine. They drank the water in there. And they've been sick and dying ever since. So that's sort of the cradle story, the story of the cradle. Most of the people that worked in the mine were people of color, the Native American people, obviously, because these mines were established across the sacred lands of the native people of New Mexico. But also there are a lot of Spanish land grants in those areas, and so there were a lot of Mexican Americans who worked in the mines as well. And then you have the development and testing of nuclear devices. Through the 1970s in Los Alamos, they freely dumped the nuclear waste into the canyons around Los Alamos. That waste made its way into our water system and eventually the Rio Grande. And obviously the Rio Grande is what supplies water to everything south of Los Alamos. And so there was that exposure as well, to say nothing of the fact that they also detonated devices in and around Los Alamos, and the winds blow fallout in every direction from there. And then maybe the most known event that was fallout producing was the Trinity test. So the Trinity test was the only test of its kind where they detonated a device on a platform 100 feet off the ground. The bomb was incredibly inefficient. They packed it with 13 pounds of plutonium. Only 3 pounds were necessary for the fission process. So a full 10 pounds of plutonium went up in the fireball that they estimate may have gone as high as 80,000 feet. Obviously, what goes up in a fireball like that has to come back down. And so an ash fell from the sky for days afterwards, basically becoming part of the environment forevermore. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years, so I don't have to tell you all, once it came back to Earth from the fireball, it will remain here as part of our environment for forevermore. Two most significant events have taken place in the very recent past. One, a professor emeritus from Northern Arizona University has been taking soil samples in and around the Trinity test site. Plutonium has its own footprint that ties it to the event that produced it. And he has found plutonium all over New Mexico that is tied to Trinity, as far north as Truchas, over 200 miles away. And definitely along the roadways north of the test site. Just recently took samples from the roadways south of the test site, and very soon we'll know what his findings are for the soil samples taken south of the test site. That should be concerning for all of us that live here, because obviously we know now that there remains plutonium in our environment. Secondly, a really very well-respected scientist from Princeton University in July released findings. He recreated the blast at Trinity using today's technology and a $40,000 computer, and was able to recreate the fallout deposition in the 10 days after Trinity. So for 10 days, he recreated what happened with the blast. All of the state of New Mexico had deposition of fallout. We know that now. We always knew that because our elders had told us the history of the ash falling from the sky in the days after Trinity. But our government had always said that the fallout went off in this northeasterly direction in a very orderly fashion over some of the most unpopulated parts of our state. It just so happens that Las Vegas was under that fallout cloud, but we never believed that to be the actuality. We knew that the fallout had gone south and east and west of the Trinity site, simply based on those oral histories that we had recorded throughout time. So now, you know, the Princeton study does bring legitimacy to those oral histories, and we know that fallout did deposit all over the state of New Mexico. Why is this important? Well, obviously because we were exposed to high levels of radiation, and in 1945, most of the small towns in New Mexico didn't have running water. We relied on the rain that fell from the sky. We collected it in our cisterns. It became part of our irrigation systems. Just so that you all know, Tularosa, where I am from, had the largest, or has the largest, open ditch system in the whole state of New Mexico. It was established just after the little town was established, and obviously people relied on the collection of water for every purpose: drinking, cooking, bathing, cleaning, etc. Now that water was all contaminated by the radioactive fallout. Plutonium is just one isotope that is resultant of a nuclear blast. There's strontium, there's cesium, there's iodine. All of these things would have become part of the water supply. Secondary to that, we did not have electricity in these small towns, so we didn't have any refrigeration, no grocery stores. Everything that we ate, we produced ourselves. You could go to a mercantile store, you could buy things like sugar, flour, coffee, cereal, rice, but you absolutely could not buy produce, meat, or dairy. So every town had many active dairies, not just one, but many active dairies. We also had people raised, cows, sheep, chickens, pigs, goats, and that was our source of protein. We hunted. We also had gardens and orchards, and in the summer months, the test took place in July, obviously. In the summer months, women would have been canning and drying everything they could get their hands on for the upcoming winter. And so now our entire food supply was contaminated by radioactive fallout. There's essentially three ways that you're exposed to radiation. There's inhalation that would have been taking place as the ash fell from the sky. There's absorption through your skin, also would have been taking place as the ash fell from the sky. And relative to that, when you don't have running water, you don't bathe as often. So any of that fallout that you actually got on your scalp or on your skin likely stayed there for a number of days until you were able to bathe and wash it away. And then there's ingestion. And obviously, from what I just described, people would have been ingesting very large quantities of tainted produce, dairy, and meat, and then they would have been consuming it in their water supply. We were maximally exposed. We lived as close as 12 miles to the test site. We know because we've done the research and the mapping using 1940 census data that there were approximately 13,000 people living in a 50-mile radius to the Trinity site. And if you extend that radius to 150 miles, there were 500,000 people. It would have encompassed Albuquerque and Santa Fe to the north, El Paso and Ciudad Juarez to the south, past Silver City to the west, and almost to the Texas border to the east. So it was essentially our entire state. The reason that we set the limit at 150 miles is because after the test, the physician assigned to the test said something to the effect of, we can never do this here again because we so overexpose people to radiation. And if we do it again any place, we have to find an area with a 150-mile radius uninhabited. So then the government took the testing to the Pacific Islands and eventually to the Nevada test site. At the Nevada test site, they conducted 93 tests above ground that actually fissioned. There were a few others that didn't fission, didn't work, and so didn't produce fallout. Of those 93 tests, New Mexico was consistently downwind of those tests as well. That's very well documented because we had monitoring stations all over the American West and beyond. And so those monitoring stations have produced data that shows New Mexico's downwind of those tests as well. What's really interesting is that, and very counterintuitive actually, when the government set up a fund in 1990 to take care of people downwind of the Nevada test site, they never included the first people ever exposed to radiation in the world as a result of an atomic bomb. And those people were the people of New Mexico. So we have been fighting for restorative justice for 18 years. 13 years of those 18 years, we've had bills introduced in Congress, never had a single vote on the House or Senate floor until July of this year. And I'm very glad to report that the US Senate, by a vote of 61 to 37, have attached what are called the amendments to the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act to include the people of New Mexico for the first time ever. We would also be including for the first time ever the people who live in Idaho, Montana, Colorado, and then all parts of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, as well as the people in Guam. This is monumental because we've never come this close, and now the bill will have to be reconciled with the members of the House, and we've been lobbying those members so that we receive a positive outcome, and we'll finally be able to be included in that fund that was set up 33 years ago, and that has paid out $2.5 billion to downwinders from other areas. So today I just wanted to talk very briefly about that, and then I wanted to segue into the film Oppenheimer. I have been interviewed probably over 50 times since the film was released, by journalists from all over the world, wanting to know what our perspective is on the film. And what I can tell you is that when they came here to establish the Manhattan Project, they essentially invaded our lands and our lives and gave no consideration to us in that equation. And we were the full support to the project. I say over and over, without the people of New Mexico, there would have been no Manhattan Project and there would have been no Trinity test. We are the ones that built the roads, the bridges, the facilities, and then eventually became the janitors who cleaned those facilities. Some men, local men in New Mexico, actually lost their lives in explosive accidents at Los Alamos during those early years of the nuclear development program. Our women were bused up there to Los Alamos. We're the ones that cooked every meal, cleaned every house, changed every diaper, and made every baby bottle, but you don't see that in the movie. We also, as I've mentioned already, lived as close as 12 miles to the Trinity test site. We're the people that actually had our land taken from us to establish first the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos. Just so everybody knows, if you have not read the book by Dr. Mariah Gomez, who is also an alumni member of New Mexico Highlands University, I would highly suggest that you do that. Her book is called Nuclear Nuevo Mexico, and it will give you great insight into the nuclear colonialism that has taken place in our state, that has resulted in the history that I'm sharing with you today. So they took the land from the people who lived on the Pajarito Plateau to establish the Manhattan Project and the Los Alamos Labs. There were over 30 families living there. Most of them were Native American and Mexican American families that had farmed and ranched on those lands for generations. And they literally burned the crops, slaughtered the animals, gave the people almost nothing for their land. I understand around $7 an acre, and sent them packing. Of course, those people were never able to reestablish any kind of life or livelihood after their land was stolen from them. Many of them became workers at Los Alamos without any options other than to do so. So that it started with that. And then the same thing happened to the ranchers who lived in and around the Trinity test site. Those lands were already part of what was called the Alamogordo bombing range at the time. Those lands were taken from the ranchers and the farmers who lived there. And they then, as time went on, expanded the size of what then turned into White Sands Missile Range. And after the Trinity test, they actually did remove many people off their ranch lands and out of what is now White Sands Missile Range to expand the breadth of the range. Again, we lived far too close to a test site. Around Nevada, it is truly uninhabited at about 80 miles. Obviously not the case in New Mexico. So you didn't see any of those things in the Oppenheimer movie. And those are big omissions. The other thing that was inaccurate in the Oppenheimer movie is that they portrayed Robert Oppenheimer as basically having been totally uninvolved in what happened after Trinity. They sort of show them dropping him off at the gates at Los Alamos as though that was the end of his involvement. The truth is, he did plan on the altitude at which they would detonate the bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that was totally left up to his decision making, and he was very involved in deciding which cities would be used. And they planned to use the two cities that they did use for for dropping the bombs, based on the fact that those cities had not experienced any prior bombings by the United States, so that they could see the full breadth of what these bombs would do. Remember that they detonated the bomb at Trinity on a platform 100 feet off the ground, and the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki were actually detonated at 1,600 and 1,800 feet off the ground. They wanted to produce mass destruction. What they learned at Trinity is that bomb produced massive fallout. That wasn't the goal in Japan. They wanted to produce massive destruction and less fallout, and that's why the bombs were detonated much higher in the atmosphere. And so that also is inaccurate in the Oppenheimer film. Now, one of the things I've said a lot lately as I've been interviewed is that, in my family, I'm the fourth generation to have cancer since 1945. I had two great-grandfathers alive at the time of the test. who both died within that first 10 years of what was called stomach cancer. We'll never fully know or understand what they had. But because back then there were no treatment facilities, there was no true treatment for cancer. They were diagnosed in El Paso, and then they were sent home to die. I have my two grandmothers had cancer. My dad died from cancer. I say oftentimes very similar to the cancer that Robert Oppenheimer had, but my dad was not a chain smoker, and he never drank a martini. My dad didn't have risk factors, but he got oral cancer 2 different times, and it wasn't metastatic. We knew that on a cellular level. And when I asked the doctors, how does this happen? My dad doesn't drink heavy, doesn't smoke, doesn't use chewing tobacco, has no viruses. And they said it just doesn't happen, but we see a lot of it in New Mexico. And then when I was 39 years old, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And the first thing they asked me was, when were you exposed to radiation? If that weren't enough, I now have a 23-year-old niece studying art at college in California, wants to work at Pixar someday. In November, she was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And I wish I could say that my family is unique, but we are not. We are documenting hundreds of families in New Mexico that are now displaying, 4 and 5 generations of cancers. So when they came here to film the Oppenheimer movie, they very much invaded our lands and our lives similarly to what happened during the Manhattan Project. They came here, took our tax incentives. We're a poor state, where 47% of all the people in New Mexico rely on Medicaid to access health care. They came here, they took our tax incentives, they used our beautiful landscapes, they used our local talent and our local workforce to produce this movie that will make literally gross hundreds of millions of dollars. And when we contacted them using somebody who was very intimate to the whole movie, which was Kai Bird, one of the authors of American Prometheus that the book is based on, I'm friends with Olivia Fermi, Enrico Fermi's granddaughter, and Olivia reached out to Kai Bird and said, can you get in touch with these filmmakers and ask them to please, please, please reflect on the people in New Mexico who have sacrificed and suffered so much as part of the film? And Kai Bird got back to us and said they're not interested. And so obviously we've been very disappointed, because they could have made this into a panel at the end of the film that would simply communicate the part that the people of New Mexico played, and they refused to do that. It would have taken nothing away from their film. Actually, I think it might have added to their film. During those first few weeks after the film was released, and at a time when we were receiving enormous press, the downwinders of New Mexico, what was trending on social media was not about Oppenheimer or Chris Nolan. It was actually about the downwinders in New Mexico. So I think we might have been even able to add sort of a human element to the film that you don't really take away from watching the film the way that it's produced currently. And so for me, it's exploitation. And we've obviously not been happy, but we have capitalized on the attention and are using the attention to communicate this message to as many people as possible. And so that's the counter narrative to Oppenheimer. Everything was not wonderful as a matter of fact, very little was wonderful for the people of New Mexico during the time of Manhattan and during the time of Trinity, and subsequent to that through to today. And so that was essentially what I was hoping to share with everybody about who the downwinders are, what we're working on every day, how close we are now to achieving our goals, and how we have utilized the Oppenheimer film to sort of catalyze some momentum. And so I would be very glad to hear any comments that anybody would like to make, or answer any questions that I might be able to answer if there are any. I suppose if you're in the Zoom and you have a question, you can raise your hand, and I'll be very, very glad to answer questions or entertain comments. I just saw the comment from Dr. Minner. Let me explain something else about all of this so that there's a full understanding. So one of the things I hear all the time as I travel across New Mexico, people tell me something that goes like this. I had a really good job. I had health insurance. I had a retirement. I was fully expecting to retire someday. My wife and I were going to travel. We were going to help our children go to college, maybe buy a home. But I always had this nagging pain in my abdomen, and there's no doctor where I live. So I put it off, and eventually my wife made me an appointment to see a gastroenterologist in Las Cruces. I went, they ran some tests, and then they told me I have stage 3 colon cancer. They sent me on to an oncologist in El Paso. I've been going there 5 days a week for chemo. I ended up losing my job and my health insurance. I'm on Medicaid now. I have taken out all the equity in my house. I've spent all of my retirement funds. I have maxed out 3 credit cards. My kids are sending me gas credit cards, Visa gift cards, so I can buy gas to get to and from El Paso. And most days I wish I would die so I wouldn't be a burden to my family any longer. And I hear this everywhere we go. We will never fully understand the negative economic impact this has had on our families and our communities. But what I can tell you is if we get this bill passed in Congress, it will be diametrically different. And let me explain why. People will be able to apply for a one-time payment of what is called compassionate restitution. That restitution will be $150,000, and people will be able to apply on behalf of deceased loved ones. Now, it's not a slam dunk. You do have hoops to jump through. It's a government program, so you have to prove that you were living in New Mexico during one of those years when they were doing above ground testing starting in 1944 all the way through 1962. You'll have to have one of the compensable cancers. There's about 20 radiogenic cancers listed. And then if you're suffering with cancer now and you meet those requirements, you would get the very best healthcare available any place in the world. No questions asked, no co-payments, no deductibles, no co-insurance. It creates an economy all its own. And we know that because there are uranium workers in the Four Corners area that already receive compensation through the program and healthcare coverage. And in the Four Corners area, there's all of these businesses that cater to that demographic. They are the people that supply everything from home health care, wheelchairs, oxygen, etc. And so it creates an economy all its own. And as I talk to policymakers, for example, I've spoken at city council meetings across the state, but as I speak to them, some of them are a little nervous about embracing this idea because they wonder about things like property values, etc. And when I tell them, I normally ask the question, when's the last time $15 million came into your community? And they always say never. And I tell them, if we can just get 100 people in your community enrolled in this program, that's $15 million. And our organization has already collected well over 1,000 health surveys, going into these small towns, going door to door, collecting health surveys. And so we know that the number of people who will qualify will be in the thousands, if not the tens of thousands. And the program is truly one that will drive economic development and could potentially bring back hundreds of millions of dollars to the state of New Mexico in restitution. And so there is that. And it's very important because instead of us bleeding money to the healthcare industry that we don't have, we will be reinforced by the government through this program. And let me just say, in the little town of Tularosa, where I'm from, a town of about 3,000 people, I was there recently and I found out about 2 families that I'm close with actually, who have children who are dealing with cancer. One of them is a 9-month-old baby who's been on chemo since he was 2 months old, bless his heart. He has to travel all the way to MD Anderson in Houston for those treatments. They can't do the treatments here in New Mexico. So we hold bake sales and car washes and garage sales to help the family put together the resources they need to travel to Houston. There's another little girl in the community who just had one of her eyes removed. I think she's 2 years old because she has eye cancer. And I always tell people, you just don't hear these stories anyplace else, but you do hear them all across New Mexico. Again, everybody has joined together to raise money for these families. And so this is the legacy. This is the legacy of the nuclear industry in New Mexico. And it's very unfortunate that we've been left out all this time.
Tina, we have a question in the room. Can you hear me from here? Yeah. Hi, Tina. This is Cesar. Welcome to the School of Social Work And I just want to acknowledge the tremendous work that you and your organization have done for New Mexico. Besides the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, you really have bring to the fore the suffering that continues to happen. One thing that I wanted to ask you is that most people think about radiation in the past with uranium mining and the bomb testing, but many people don't know about the waste isolation pilot plant that is in Carlsbad. And many of us have had experience those big trucks traveling from up north to central New Mexico, going to the south. And if you can speak a little bit about the risk that we continue to have even today in, basically the entire New Mexico, and, the fact that we're not covered by this act really creates a tremendous problem for us because we've been ignored this long.
That is a really great question. I had mentioned earlier the cradle to grave process taking place here. I never addressed the grave, so let's do that now. Thank you for asking the question. New Mexico is the only place in the whole country where we have a permanent repository, and at that repository, the waste isolation pilot plant, we actually only deal with transuranic waste or low-level nuclear waste. But we are now under consideration, and the AEC has already given the go-ahead to a private company called Holtec to bring high-level nuclear waste, spent plutonium rods from nuclear power plants all across the country. So if you want to picture this, they'll be coming from the East Coast and the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, and the Great Lakes area, and they'll bring these spent plutonium rods to New Mexico, and they're going to store them in casks above ground, and it's supposed to be a temporary spot for storage, but we don't have a permanent location for them. So in my mind, it will likely become a permanent storage. And I don't have to tell you all, everybody is aware of what's been going on with the rail system in the United States recently, with all of the derailments finally being uncovered. I mean, I think these things have been going on for a very long time, but outside of our reality, and now because of what took place recently in Ohio, we're very much aware of how inadequate our rail system is. These casks are incredibly heavy. And so part of the reason they experienced the derailment they did in Ohio was because the train was overburdened. It was carrying too much weight. These casks, again, are incredibly heavy. They're going to bring them here on the rail system, store them above ground. And what I keep telling people about this is that they tell us it's safe, and seemingly it is, until the moment it's not. And then it's catastrophic and nobody comes back. And New Mexico will never be able to absorb the cost of an accident there. The WIP site in 2015, they had drums that literally popped their seal. And why did that happen? Because the contractor from Los Alamos decided to use a different and less expensive cat litter, because that's what they packaged this waste in. They switched to a different type of cat litter. There was a chemical reaction take place and it popped those drums. It was closed for 5 years and it cost $3 billion to abate that situation. $3 billion. That's low-level waste. That's a program run by our government. Holtec is private industry. They will never be able to buy enough insurance to insure this process. They will never be able to find enough insurance to insure this process. They will simply file bankruptcy, change the name of their company, leave New Mexico, and we will be left with the issue that results. Trinity is a good example of that. I continue to say the past is a good predictor of the future. Since we've never been able to get anybody in our government to come back and take care of the mess they made at Trinity, why would we ever trust private industry to come back and take care of some mess that they would make at Holtec? Everybody in New Mexico has to stand together. The good thing is all of our elected officials are against the Holtec site. We can never accept this. This is not an acceptable, or it's untenable for us as residents in this state, because we will never be able to address a potential nuclear disaster that could take place there. I was in a meeting once where they allowed us to make comments, and this woman got up, and I thought it was like maybe the most, it was like the simplest question asked, but maybe the most relevant. She said, how will you ever protect these rail cars along all this rail system from an act of terrorism? And they said, well, we will have armed guards on those trains, and we will keep the route secret. And I thought to myself, imagine counting on something like that. First of all, somebody could fire a missile into the train, and I don't care how many armed guards you have on the train, you wouldn't be able to stop that scenario. And you know, keeping the route secret, that's another thing I just don't want to entrust my future with. And so we have to stand together against this. We have to educate people about it. Like I said, the AEC has already given the go-ahead, but we're in the middle of lawsuits that have been filed back and forth because our governor has personally told me, I will never, ever, ever stop fighting against Holtec. But another election could give us a different result. You know, another governor could give us an entirely different result. The local business people in that area, and when you guys see that there's local support, please beware of this. Some of those local leaders are fully supporting this project because they're partners with Holtec, and they stand to make hundreds of millions of dollars out of that partnership. And that is a conflict of interest. And a lot of people have never spoken truth about that, but there are investigative journalists that have uncovered those relationships, and those local business people are true partners in this process. And so the rest of us have to push back. There's no choices. We have to push back on this. Any other questions, thoughts?
Tina, there are a couple comments in the chat. I don't know if you can see the chat, if I can read it to you. Crystal says, what ways do you think these efforts can be supported? Also, what bills should we be aware about for hopeful systemic change?
So right now, the efforts that people can make, I always tell everybody, you can go to our website, which is trinitydownwinders.com, Trinity Downwinders, plural, downwinders.com. And there's a link there to a call to action. And basically that will give you all the information, even some really useful messaging that you can use. But we need you to reach out to Congress. The reason that we got the bill passed in the US Senate recently is because Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, became aware of a spill that took place in St. Louis, and he wants to add those people to the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. And so with his assistance, we were able to deliver the 61 votes. So we've reached out to Senator Hawley. I got to meet him in person last week, and what we have told him is that for the first time ever, he delivered the votes that we needed, and that puts him in a great position with us and with everybody else. This is low-hanging fruit, folks. This is a nonpartisan issue. We need to work on it in a bipartisan fashion. Exposure to radiation is not discerning. It affects the young, the old, the male, the female, the black, the white, the Democrat, and the Republican alike. And if you look at the demographics of the states that we're trying to add, they are primarily red states. But it is the Republicans that continuously tell us that it's going to cost too much. And let me just say this much: we spend $50 billion annually, $50 billion annually, just maintaining our nuclear arsenal, not building a new pit, not testing a new device, not developing a new device, just putting our nukes to bed at night. $50 billion. The program has paid out $2.5 billion over 33 years. So when you go to our website, there will be messaging around all of this. There will be links so that you can find who your members of Congress are. All 5 of our members of Congress support. Senator Lujan has been a champion, Representative Ledger Fernandez has been a champion, and all of the other members, including Senator Heinrich, Representative Stansberry, and Representative Vasquez, are all co-signers and supporters. But we need to get people motivated in places like Utah, where we don't have very much support, and in places like Montana, where we don't have very much support. And everybody can send an email or make a phone call and just say, we're asking that members of Congress continue to support Amendment 1058 to the National Defense Authorization Act. So it's Amendment 1058 to the NDAA that would extend and expand the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. And again, all of that information is at our website.
Right. Tina, when you're ready, Dr. Rebecca Schneider would like to share her screen with information about the roundtable event that you were a part of. Right. Okay.
This was such a fantastic talk, and I think I speak for everybody in attendance that we could listen to much, much more. And I luckily have an invitation for you to listen to more from Tina on Friday. There's a learning community here at Highlands that Dr. Luke Ritter and myself have been putting together. And our students will be introducing our 4 amazing speakers, including Tina Cordova. And our students have also put together some questions. So this event goes from 11 to 1 p.m. in the Armis Makerspace, and MTZ food truck will be available at 1 o'clock. We will be taking a bit of an intermission around noon. So if you can only come for the second half, you won't be disrupting. We'll be taking kind of a natural break. So come and hear more, and also see our amazing first-year freshmen who have put a lot of thought into welcoming these experts into the space. So it's Tina, it's also Mariah Gomez, author of Nuclear Nuevo Mexico, Joseph Mangano, and our own Dr. Luke Ritter. So thanks for giving me space to promote this event.
Absolutely. And if I can just say, kind of as something that would encourage people to attend, well, Dr. Gomez, Mariah Gomez, she's just incredible. She is a professor at UNM, and she's written that amazing book, and I know her very well. We've had a chance to work together for a very, very long time. We actually did a health impact assessment and worked on that together, and she wrote the actual final analysis of that. And I'm a big fan of hers, and I'm also a fan of Dr. or Joe Mangano. For those of you who don't know, what brought an end to the above ground nuclear testing in the 1960s was that a group of women led this project to collect baby teeth. So they were asking Americans all across the country, as your children lose their teeth, don't discard them. Put them in an envelope, put their name and date of birth and place of birth and where they live, and send them to us. And they had the presence of mind to do this, and then start looking at those teeth to see if they were actually displaying strontium in them, and they found out that they were. And President Kennedy worked with Khrushchev to bring about this treaty to stop the above ground testing. And he delivered the most amazing speech about it and said something to the effect of, even if only one child has died as a result of it, it's one too many, because it's not natural. And so Joe Mangano and his group of researchers have possession of all of these teeth. And I understand they have teeth from all 50 states. I know they have teeth from New Mexico because I've spoken to him about it. And they're going to further test and evaluate these teeth, and then they're going to locate these people if they can, or do their best to locate them and find out what kind of health outcomes they had, especially for those that did have strontium in their teeth. Just so everybody knows, once you absorb that, it stays there forever in your bones, giving off radiation. It has a half-life of about 33 years. And so it's a significant irradiator, and also one that likely causes a lot of health problems once it's been absorbed into your bones and your teeth. So I'm anxious to hear what he has to say. I've never met him in person. It should be really amazing to hear what he has to say about their further studies with the baby teeth.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Schneider. Are there other questions for Tina? Dr. Ritter says, it sounds like a great event on Friday. The president's office can support refreshments. Did I hear there would be a food truck there? Please work with Otto. We'll take care of the refreshments. First events booked at that time already, which I regret.
Thank you, Dr. Minner. Any other questions or comments? I know people from throughout New Mexico continuously share their own family histories with me, and it's always pretty amazing. Just so you all know, our representative Ledger Fernandez is from the Las Vegas area, as you all know. And when I first met her and started a dialogue with her about this, she told me that there were 5 members of her family that had developed cancer all at the same time, and she's the only one that had survived. And she actually lost a mom and a sister, both to lung cancer, and neither one of them had ever smoked. But we hear these kinds of stories all the time, and it's a resounding theme here in New Mexico that families all across our state have suffered greatly as a result. So I would suppose that there are some of you who are on the Zoom that have had experiences similar.
If you have a question for Tina, feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Well, if there are no other questions, let me just again say that the documentary will premiere during the Santa Fe International Film Festival in Santa Fe. I think the first night that it actually will be screened is Friday. That's the 20th of October, and then it'll screen again on Sunday, the 22nd of October. We also have the upcoming open house at the Trinity site. If you all are not aware, they open the Trinity site to visitors twice a year. It's kind of crazy. It's actually very crazy. There's still signs everywhere that warn of the radiological dangers, and they have armed guards making sure that you don't pick up anything and take it out of there. But they'll serve you a hamburger and a hot dog and a Coke and let your kids run around in the dirt out there. And for me, we place ourselves at the gate on the highway with our signs, and we stage just a peaceful demonstration to let people know that there is another side to this, that there's not just the science and industry, there's the sacrifice and suffering of the people of New Mexico. And it's amazing who we meet. We have literally kept track of the cars entering, and we've seen cars from, last time we were there were cars from 48 different states. It's a major attraction. Nuclear tourism is a big thing in New Mexico, for those of you who don't know about that. And so this is a major attraction. They're expecting somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 people will go in October as a result of the Oppenheimer film. So we'll be there. It's October 21st, and we stage ourselves along Highway 380. That would be east of San Antonio. And you can't miss us. There'll be quite a few of us out there. And we stage ourselves there just to greet people as they enter and as they leave, and communicate our message, pass out our literature, and ask people to support us in our fight for restorative justice. So that's October 21st. And if anybody wants to join us, they're welcome to be there with us.
The documenter asks if we can get the documentary up here, that would be great. The film, a panel, a discussion, let me know if anyone wants to work on it.
We can make that happen, Dr. Minner, and I will talk to the producer about making sure that we make that happen. And it should happen at Highlands because of the part that Highlands has played in preparing me to do this work. Actually, it absolutely should happen at Highlands.
Thank you again, Tina. And there's one more comment that would be